watchdog, anti-gunners, get ready for the pain. The misinformation is over because this is the blunt object. From Gun Owners of America, this is Lock and Load with Bill Frady. Bill Frady.
All right, as we roll into the third hour on a Wednesday, this is Lock and Load. Unsurprisingly, I consider my guest to be the most effective individual Second Amendment advocate out there, and apparently a lot of media outlets do too. And for some reason, the lightweight mental midgets at Rolling Stone took exception to that. So they've written a little hit piece on him. And it's interesting that the guy who wrote this piece, his last name is Zeitschik, also works for David Brock at Media Matters as well. The Media Matters of David Brock runs both the American Independent Institute, where Zeitschik also works, and Media Matters for America. Joining me again is the boss, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt. Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning to you. You know, Mr. Zeitschik has, in another incarnation, worked at the Brady campaign. So naturally, he wouldn't come to the table with good thoughts about anybody that likes the idea of the American people being able to, if need be, point guns at the government to keep them from becoming tyrannical. That's just crazy talk in his world. And, of course, it's crazy because the boys that he likes to play with are the ones that want to go and run a tyrannical government. So he takes it kind of personally, and he should. That's what the Second Amendment's all about. We want you to take it personally, King George.
It's interesting that Rolling Stone, while they try to paint you as, let's see, you're anti-Semitic, you're anti-black, you are the anti-everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
Except gun. Yeah. Except gun.
Right.
And they look upon, now you're a man who's largely driven and take a lot of your cues on your life from your faith.
You bet.
And somehow or other that's become extreme too.
Yes. Christianity should only be taken not literally, but just as an entertaining parlor discussion on a Friday evening perhaps. To actually think that the thou shalt nots are to be taken seriously, well, that's offensive. That doesn't make me comfortable.
While we have an chief executive of the country who thinks the most delightful sound that he's ever heard is prayer time in Islam.
Yep. The 5 times a day intonation of the imams. The president finds that beautiful. I find it demonic, because that's really what Islam is. And it's really sad to think that a president of the United States finds a demonic religion to have a pleasant sound.
One thing I noticed in the article, if we want to be loose with definitions and call it that, is they sort of seem to be trying to take gun rights advocacy at large, NRA, Second Amendment Foundation, GOA, National Association of Gun Rights, and they're trying to fence all of you off. They're trying to make it seem like you guys are all at odds. You have worked together in the past, but now you're at odds, and, your position makes you always at odds with everybody else. And the big difference between the gun rights advocacy organizations and the gun control organizations is people actually pay to be members of gun rights advocacy groups.
That's right. We don't have a Soros or a Warren Buffett to keep our doors open. We absolutely depend on grassroots membership who voluntarily make contributions, whatever they can. Sometimes it's not very much at all. It might be $5 or $10. We're glad to take it, especially if they have an email address that we can use to communicate with them about what's happening on Capitol Hill. And the alerts that we send out, we can embed an email that they can send off to their member of Congress, so these Congress critters know that there are real people in their congressional districts or in their states who are supporting or opposing particular pieces of legislation. That really irritates elected officials who want to do the wrong thing because they realize there may be consequences. And so, naturally, we're not very popular with the establishment. And Rolling Stones, for all of its bearded coffee house patina is actually establishment. And what they're trying to do is to make gun control appear to be the default position of the wise people, arbiters.
Now, let's not go slamming coffee houses. When you were in town, you took me to Starbucks.
I admit I do imbibe.
Okay. But, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, they do have some good ideas. They know how to make a good cup of coffee.
That's right.
That's about as far as it goes, and that's what they should stick to.
That's right. Exactly right. And if some of the patrons there have some nutty ideas, well, it's a free country. But don't try to impose those nutty ideas on us.
One of the things that they also mention, and Media Matters also goes into their review of the article, which I think it's pretty funny that they decided to review their own article. But, they point out to your media appearances. Now, whenever there is a shooting incident of some sort, or there's a law pending in Congress or something, the call probably goes out. I mean, the way I got associated with you was I put a call out looking for things on a particular topic, and you said yes, whereas most everybody else says, well, we'll have our media department get back to you or something else. Most of the time, when they're putting that call out, you're the only one that does say yes, aren't you?
That is frequently the case, because we know exactly what our position is. It's been the same for going on 40 years, and when something comes up, we have the same template that we use to figure out what just happened and how it ought to be viewed from the constitutional point of view.
When I remember this very clearly, I think you and Eric, your son, were in the air or something on the way, and right after the Aurora shooting, people were flocking to the Gun Owners of America website, and the only one that was doing anything that day was I was doing the live podcast. And, I mean, the amount of people that went from the website to the podcast because they came to Gun Owners of America right away to see what Gun Owners of America's position was going to be, which, by the way, I fully admit I fumbled that ball because most people wanting details on that shooting, which I didn't have. But they were there. They were quite timely about it, and they all came there looking for answers. And, most of the time when something like this happens, I see the NRA put out a statement. They say, our statement is we'll put out a statement in 5 days or 7 days or 10 days. And when they call you up, they're like, what time?
It's like they have to have a board meeting before they can issue a statement on a major development. And, hey, the Constitution hasn't changed. It's the same, happily, as pretty much as it was when it was produced. And once you got it figured out, it's just kind of like a piece of music that you've memorized. You just sit down and play it again.
Well, this is how he's described in Rolling Stone, where you can also find such captivating articles as The Cast of Napoleon Dynamite 10 years later. How do they look today? He's described as the zealot, the fear-mongering, paranoia-stroking executive director of Gun Owners of America, and how he remade the modern gun movement. Or I just call him the boss. You cannot deny his effectiveness. Joined again by Larry Pratt.
Bill, one of the things that is so characteristic of the way so many liberals think is that when there's a difference of opinion, and I think I might have counted a couple of times specifically in the article where they clearly had a different opinion. The facts were not in dispute. It was just the takeaway conclusion. And if you have a different opinion from them, you are a liar. They are in the business of demeaning and character assassination all too often. And that technique apparently that's well used in the arsenal over there at Rolling Stone.
Well, I mean, the way they characterize you, okay, for somebody that's never met, if you've never met Larry Pratt, if you were to spend an hour with him, you would be impressed by his energy at any age, let alone the one he carries around. But you would also find somebody that's very quiet, sort of, I introduced him at some function and he wasn't sitting there fidgeting or anything, ready to get at it or anything. He very quietly had a conversation with the people in the audience, and it was almost conversational. Very much not self-aware of anything is Mr. Pratt. They make it out like you run around with a headband and some blood trickling down your face, and you've got RPG on one shoulder and an AK on the other, and you just can't wait to go out and just kill something. And the part that is impressed on me, if you were actually that way, and we were all actually that way, there would be no gun controllers. We would have killed them all by now.
That's right. The world would be a lot more calm. We'd hear a lot less chatter. But in fact, we do tolerate these folks. We strongly disagree with them. We don't call them liars unless they're actually twisting facts. But if they have a different opinion from ours, we acknowledge that, okay, they have a right to be stupid.
They have, as a character, as an example of this, in this same issue of Rolling Stone is going to be this article, The 5 Most Deadly Guns. Now, they're not out there saying, well, the H&K MP7, which cost Jerry Sayah's job at Recoil magazine because of his ammunition. They've got rifles, shotguns, pistols, revolvers, and Derringers. And in the Derringers part, they're talking about semi-automatic rifles. So they're out there. They're out there. They're not talking about. They're just saying all guns are deadly, which I sort of already knew that anyway. That's why I respectfully handle them and don't put my trigger on it. Don't point it at people, and
Can you send me information how I can get an AR-15 Derringer?
I've been wondering about that myself. A pocket rifle.
Bless their hearts. They are so ignorant.
Well, yeah, they get out there and they don't have any idea what they're talking about, which doesn't the whole journalistic putting on airs go straight out the window when you don't know what you're talking about, but you're writing an expose on it anyway?
Because they know that they make them uncomfortable, and they just don't want to have anything around it makes them uncomfortable. And I think that's those that are not communists, like the president, who want to disarm us so he can control us. Many of those in the gun control side of the political discussion are arguing from their feelings. They just aren't comfortable. The idea that there might be somebody in the room packing a piece concealed just makes them feel uncomfortable. And so it's a feeling type of argument for many of them. Now, obviously, I've already exempted the president because he, like Vladimir Lenin, knows exactly what he wants to do with our guns. He wants to take them and turn them on us.
Or at very least control all of them and have that monopoly on violence.
Well, once they're controlled, then the next step is to remove them, because we can't trust us to keep those guns just in the safe all the time,
I'm seriously wondering, right now, and I've read this and I've talked to some guys about it, the military is actively seeking transgender soldiers. For me, that sort of throws the whole turn the military against the American people against us sort of on its ear. It's already down at the lowest level. They're giving pink slips to the combat veterans, and they want to bring in the transgenders.
Which, once they've destroyed the family, then they want to destroy the last bastion of those that represent a willingness to defend an America that has been protected by the Constitution, an America which produced soldiers from families. When you don't have families anymore, then you have people that are dependent upon the government. And if they had an army that was dependent upon Barack Obama, then you'd no longer have an army that had sworn real allegiance to the Constitution. And we would have become, like Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, an army that has pledged allegiance to the president. Right. And I think that's what they're shooting for.
They make one big mistake. For some reason, they point out how much the media comes to you, and they also show you pictured talking to very small groups. And what they basically are doing is illustrating just exactly how far and wide you range getting the word out, aren't they?
They obviously are concerned that we're having an impact. They wouldn't have written that hit piece had they not thought I had to be dealt with. I had to be put in my place. I had to be destroyed. Well, if they are calling gun owners of America powerful, that we produce fear in members of Congress and whatnot, I'll take that.
Yeah, when did that become a bad thing? I kind of think that for all of their, they've got the genesis of how Gun Owners of America began and everything else. And what they're basically showing is the power of grassroots and the fear the traditional mainstream has of the grassroots.
Because we have a grassroots.
Right.
And many conservative causes have a grassroots, but they don't. The left typically has high-paid managers who create committees that receive federal funds and have no grassroots. So they have lots of managers, lots of executive directors and presidents and so forth, and very, very little grassroots. And so that's why we can overwhelm politicians. That's why we can make them nervous about what the grassroots are thinking, because they hear from our folks. Our folks send them email and send them postcards that we have provided for that purpose, and they're obviously willing to put a stamp on those postcards and obviously willing to go click, click, click and send off those pre-written email that we send out if they sign up for our alert system. And that just drives the left nuts. I know it drives congressmen nuts because they don't want to be, they don't want to have fires lit underneath them.
They don't want to be reminded that they report to people, do they? Hang on, Fleming. When we come back, we're going to talk about your favorite federal agency. On a Wednesday, this is Lock and Load. I want you to picture somebody looking at you and saying, here's this aircraft, and you can take off in it, but there's only enough fuel in it for you to get to altitude before it comes crashing to the earth. And that kind of comparison is what the Government Accounting Office has found out about the ATF. They don't have the resources to do what they're trying to do, which begs the question.
Well, there is good news then.
That is good news, but they still seem to do it. I mean, I've been wondering who funded all the Fast and Furious rifles up to this point.
Well, that was what I think in another context would be called walking around money. It was given to the cartel pawns that were walking into stores and laying down cash on barrel to buy guns. By the way, just to circle back for a second,
sure.
We were, as we headed into the break, we were talking about grassroots and the fact that gun owners, and more generally those on the right, tend to have a grassroots and not so much on the other side. Well, I saw a little account of David Pratt. He's the fellow that beat Eric Cantor in the 7th Congressional District here in Virginia. David Pratt is very likely to be the next congressman because it's a Republican and conservative district. Well, he raised in the last month, 40 days actually, $400,000 from 4,673 individual donors. That's grassroots.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to say I'm one of those roots.
Yeah, he did this without a whole lot of money, did he? He didn't have the bells and whistles that Cantor had, did he?
Overall, he had some $300,000 by the time the election took place, and Cantor had probably spent, he had $2.5 million, he probably spent about $1 million. But Cantor was so convinced that even though Pratt was beginning to move in the polls, and that's why Cantor had made the decision to spend $1 million on media, radio, TV ads, he pretty much thought he had it in the bag. And so on election night, from what little birds have told me, he was at a very high-priced restaurant being feted by some lobbyists. And about 9:30, he pulls out his device and he looks at it, and his eyes get buggy, and he's being creamed. He ended up losing by some 12 points. That just slapped him on the backside of the head. But that's grassroots. That is absolutely the story of the grassroots. Yes, we can, Mr. Obama. Yes, we can. And no, you can't, because you don't have grassroots. All you have are thugs with guns, with government orders, and we're here to tell you, we told you at the Bundy Ranch in Nevada, we told you at the Red River when you tried to steal some land through the EPA on the Texas-Oklahoma border, we told you we're not going to stand for it. And the militia's on its way now, from what I understand, down to the Laredo sector where most of the invasion is coming across from Mexico, and the militia's going to be there to tell folks, you're not welcome here, not without your papers. I think we still have a little bit of a pulse here in our country, and those are some indications that we do.
They just don't write about it very much in Rolling Stone magazine. That's why nobody knows. Actually, right. I wonder, Rolling Stone has become not very relevant in today's world. I wonder if this is going to be read firsthand by dozens. Yeah.
I'm sure by dozens. I'm sure they have their roots there somewhere over on maybe Capitol Hill, maybe up in Greenwich Village in New York City, maybe in some Castro Street in San Francisco.
Right.
They have their little pockets, and they'll be all a Twitter about this terrible gun lobby guy, and but they won't do anything about it.
Doesn't that sort of backfire on them every time? I mean, Piers Morgan tried to vilify you, and let the fundraising begin, and then when New York Times profiled you.
Let me just punctuate what you said. Piers Morgan is our single largest donor. He, in effect, gave us more than $1 million. People crashed our server 3 times. They couldn't get in touch with us and send us a contribution fast enough, and became part of the Piers Morgan Memorial email list, which subsequently was that robust group of people who defeated gun control last year, even while the NRA was supporting it, which we hadn't known until we ended up defeating it. And then one of the sponsors of the Senate bill complained that when the NRA finally came out and endorsed opposition to the bill, Senator Manchin was screaming, "I've been betrayed. They've done a 180. We almost had the bill passed." And that was grassroots. And a lot of those roots were fertilized by Piers Morgan.
Yep.
I love the guy. I'm sorry he's no longer broadcasting.
Well, we got, John Walsh is going to come on board. Maybe you'll get a call from him.
He doesn't have a British accent, though. It's not quite as offensive.
I understand.
But maybe Walsh can learn to speak with an accent. By the way, he had a son, I think it was a son, who was murdered,
Adam.
but not with a gun.
No.
And yet he's an anti-gun zealot.
Tell me this, the murders that happened in San Francisco when Feinstein was working in San Franciscan government, didn't that guy use a revolver that killed
the cop that went rogue?
Yeah.
I imagine it was, because that was typically the service weapon in that day.
Yeah, I just wonder how these guys segue from the causes of their personal trauma and just look at just such a wide, vast swath of a particular item and say, these are dangerous and must be banned. I've seen murder firsthand. You don't know what it's like. You just don't know. I've often wondered about that.
Well, you started off on something which really caught my fancy. I was listening to someone else as I drove in, listing all of the 5 main crime guns in the country. Rifles, shotguns, pistols, revolvers, and derringers. Is there anything else?
I don't think so. I mean, they're just covering basic types of firearms.
They are so ignorant, and I'm not going to try to educate them, because I don't want them to tweak anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment laws or legislation that they might be pushing. I'm just saying that we ought to do an Alinsky on them. We ought to ridicule them. We ought to point out that they really don't have a clue what they're talking about. They don't know that their wonderful, beloved gun-free zones are murder magnets where almost all of our mass murders have occurred in the last several decades, but they just don't feel comfortable thinking that somebody might have a gun in his school. Are you crazy?
We could go for a full hour on that one out of what just happened in Missouri. In Missouri, they were going to train teachers to a degree higher than police officers to carry concealed in the schools, and the governor vetoed that, and I guess there's a chance that they may override his veto and make that happen. But
that would be truly excellent. That would be national leadership.
Yeah,
And I'm not sure that, I don't mind them being trained above a police officer's level, but that's really not necessary. If some dirtbag comes crashing through the door, he's not likely to be in the general direction of most of the kids, and he's going to do a lot more damage than a stray shot from a teacher.
I think that they use that in order to somehow, they keep saying, well, police officers are the only ones that are trained high enough to qualify and carry a gun. I think that was sort of to allay certain fears for the low-info voter. If
No
they
doubt.
said, well, police officers have to pass with a score of 70, and the teachers have to pass with a score of 90. So that makes it seem like they've become some sort of spec ops warfare ninjas with a gun. In addition,
That means that we can get rid of the We could get rid of the police officers working at the school if the teachers are at 90.
They're more
We'll
proficient.
save some money. Maybe I'm in for this.
Maybe you should be. You can find out about Gun Owners of America by going to gunowners.org. You can join us, which would be excellent, because a numerically superior opponent is always a good thing. Or you can sign up for the free email blast, which sort of makes you a minute man then in the Gun Owners of America parlance, where you're always kept in the loop. That's free. So you should be doing one or the other.
Or both.
Or both. Because then this guy, you know, maybe he could start staying in the Ramada Inn instead of Motel 6 when he's out on the road.
I'm Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America, and I want to invite you to join the Second Amendment movement with Gun Owners of America, the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. Take action by becoming a GOA member today by going to gunowners.org. Gun Owners members receive the GOA newsletter, fact sheets, alerts, certificates, and more. But there's more to joining GOA than just a list of member benefits. The united voice of GOA members has been successful in defeating restrictive legislation designed to disarm our population. GOA has helped to get strong constitutional members of Congress like Senator Ted Cruz elected. And with your help, GOA will continue to successfully defend the rights of gun owners in the courts. Participate in our efforts to restore and preserve the nation's right to keep and bear arms. All contributions to our lobbying efforts are used exclusively to support or oppose firearms legislation. Join online at gunowners.org.
The executive director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt, joins me one more time before we go away. Larry, they're saying that the GAO was saying that ATF cannot properly investigate people that are prohibited from buying guns and using guns in the wrong way. So I guess it was a smoking hot idea to not only not investigate it, but to facilitate it with Fast and Furious.
You know, that is just, they want to check our backgrounds when we buy a gun.
Right.
And yet they were promiscuously, if I may use that word, handing out guns to cartel representatives, agents, actors, during Fast and Furious, knowing that people would be killed, murdered. And when I remember reading about the reaction of the acting director of ATF at the time when he saw that the body count had increased on the Mexican northern border. Good, he said. Good? Good that people are getting killed? What a monster. And this is a guy who's supposed to be one of the top cops in the country. I think they all ought to be sent packing. They're not a constitutionally sanctioned agency, and they've done a whole lot more harm, obviously, than they've done good. For every bad guy that they might have actually apprehended, how many dead people have resulted from Waco to Ruby Ridge to Fast and Furious and to who knows how many others that haven't even come into the light of day?
One thing I didn't notice, and I'm not segueing into this, but I mean, B. Todd Jones, that statement he made sounds anti-Hispanic to me, like a tinge with Hispanic racism. I did notice they didn't call you that in the Rolling Stone hit piece. You like Latin America, don't you?
Well, sort of. I attend an Hispanic church. My wife was born in Panama. I am fluent in Spanish. I can do simultaneous translation from either language. So, yeah, it would be a little hard to say that I'm an anti-Hispanic bigot.
So it almost sounds as if you look at those dead Mexicans from the Fast and Furious guns as human beings.
Yeah, you betcha. And I'm not sure that they were anything other than cutaways, cutouts, for the folks at the ATF. Now, happily, there were some ATF agents with a soul, and one of them was John Dodson, who eventually went public and paid for it dearly, and so have other whistleblowers, violations of federal law when they get hammered. But it was thanks to Dodson that the two bloggers that blew this, I think he was, if not one of the initial conduits of information about Fast and Furious. Bloggers Mike Vanderboe and David Codria were in contact with people from the cleanupatf.org website that had been set up anonymously by some ATF agents, and I suspect it was included Dodson. And, you know, it was the devil trying to find a mainstream reporter that could be trusted to respect the anonymity of the agents that were bringing this information forward, and they finally ran into Cheryl Atkinson at CBS News, and she agreed to all the limitations about how much of the information she could use now, because using more of it would compromise the agents that wanted to still at that point remain behind the scenes. And she did a first-class job. I remember rather vividly, I did a show with Megyn Kelly on Fox the night before Cheryl Atkinson's story broke the next day. And I had tried to explain to the producer that the new head of ATF wasn't really the story, that the reason he wasn't going to testify was because he didn't want to risk getting asked questions about Fast and Furious. Well, he'd never heard of Fast and Furious. And I tried on several occasions to make the point that, okay, we can talk about him not coming up to testify for his nomination appearance, but the real story is why he won't. Well, 3 times during the interview with Megyn Kelly, who had not been briefed by the producer about what I thought the real story needed to be, I tried to inject the information into our discussion in a, 5-7 minute interval. Most of those segments are about that length. So 3 times I tried, never really quite got to do it fully. And after I was finished, the producer came over to me and he said, if you'd have said at the beginning what you said at the end, I think Megyn would have been able to handle it a lot more easily. So he hadn't heard the first 2 times either. It took so much of an effort for a normal person to process the fact that the United States government was operating a murder syndicate for a political purpose. It just boggled the mind.
Well, now that this has come out that they can't do this, that they can't actually effectively run an operation of the type of Fast and Furious and actually do, dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Is this why you think executive privilege has been slapped on all these documents? And do you think when we finally get those documents that there's going to be, we're going to see the first attorney general go to jail in handcuffs?
I think it could happen because the House of Representatives does have a pokey up in the House complex. It does have its own lawyers that could prosecute in federal court, but they're not pushing it. They have actually filed a criminal contempt citation in federal district court against Eric Holder, and that puppy has been sitting there with its tongue hanging out like in a hot car, waiting to be heard, and the court isn't bringing it up. So if the House is really serious about Holder's criminal contempt complaint being dealt with, they should do something that they can do, which the founders gave them the authority to do. They should say no funds may be spent for the D.C. federal court until they begin to hear the criminal complaint from the House of Representatives against Eric Holder. So if they're not getting their paycheck, I think we'll get their attention.
Yeah, I know that they're otherwise busy, but I'd like to see Trey Gowdy and Jason Chaffetz run that one, if they could.
Oh, my. Wouldn't that be something? I don't know about Chavitz's background, but I know that Gowdy was a federal prosecutor, and from what I've seen him do in Congress, he obviously must have been a pretty good one.
Yeah, he was a celebrity before he became a celebrity, but he's very high on Jason Chaffetz. Trey is. I've talked to him, and he's told me that. But
in which case, if he's high on him, so am I. Yeah. I've liked what I've seen in the committee hearings where Chaffetz has been. He's aggressive. He's well informed. He's sure-footed. He's a pretty good guy.
Yes, sir. Before we run out of time, Gun Owners of America has never sat down and helped craft gun legislation. Not ever. They have never gotten out there and said, okay, well, we'll give you this if you'll give us this. If you heard Larry Pratt talk...
legislation we tend to write would do away with, say, gun-free school zones.
Right.
That is a bill that we helped to draft.
But if you heard Larry Pratt talking in 1978, he sounds a lot like he does in 2014 because it's the same message over and over again. If you are not allied with us yet, take the time. That $20 bill that you're going to send to Gun Owners of America for 1 year of membership and information and everything else, Larry's going to wring that out till it's just a white piece of paper. He gets all 2,000 pennies of that $20 worth and is the most bang for the buck wise. This is the most constitutional value you're going to become a member of. Thanks for taking the time to join me today, boss. I'll be in touch.
Great to be with you. I just appreciate your show so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Stay safe. All right, folks, we're going to do this again in 21 hours. And between now and then, I want you to remember this. It has never, ever been about gun control. It has been, it's always going to be about total control. On a Wednesday, this has been Lock and Load.
The Bill of Rights protects every American's God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now that right is being seriously undermined as legally registered rifles are being confiscated in some parts of our country. If we're not careful, we may find ourselves with no right to own guns, and that's where Gun Owners of America comes in. Gun Owners of America is in Washington every day fighting for you to keep that right. Congressman Ron Paul has called GOA the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. You need to be part of this great grassroots group of activists who are keeping the heat on their members of Congress. Find out right now how you can join. Call 888-886-GUNS and get started receiving their fact-filled newsletters and action alerts. Call 888-886-GUNS or go to their webpage at gunowners.org and help make your voice heard in Washington. Make that call right now and call Gun Owners of America at 888-886-GUNS. Remember, it's not just about gun control, it's about control.